Yoaihime draws cute character illustrations, often using traditional materials such as markers and fineliners. The cute and aesthetic look of the art is nice to me. I really like how pretty it looks. I usually draw digitally, while Yoai mostly works with traditional tools. That's why I also thought it would be interesting to see how doing this study using digital tools instead of traditional ones would turn out. For this study, we'll go over different elements included in the art first and then apply this in an illustration. Here Yoai uses varying line thickness. The lines are clean and rather thick. Since most of her art is traditional, there is also a hand-drawn feel to it. In some cases, for example for the iris, no line art is included as well. Silhouette lines and intersecting ones will most of the time be thicker. You can especially see the varying line thickness for the hair of the characters Yoai draws. Lines outlining the skin, especially inner ones, can be colored. Other than this, lines tend to be black, dark brown, or they have a darker color of whatever they are surrounding. The blue hair here has dark blue outlines, for example. After the lines, we move on to the bodies. The characters are around 6 heads tall. They have rather cute proportions. Arms and the waist tend to be thin, while legs can be wider. The hands are small and elegant, and the characters look rather young as well due to the bigger heads. Now we're done with the body. Next, let's move on to the face shape. This is mostly rounded with a pointy chin and a rounded jaw and cheeks. The jaw is very low here, making the faces appear more chibi-like. Due to this, the change of direction at the face outline, going downwards to more inwards, would be at around the mouth level. It's not at one clear point since the jaw outline is rounded. The faces appear cute and young because of the full and rounded cheeks or jaw. At times this can be a bit more flat or a bit more puffy. This can vary for each illustration. It's also dependent on the head angle. The forehead and upper part of the head is slightly wider than the lower part. The face shape will be made up of one more straight inner and one more rounded side, with a bigger change of direction on the outer side in the 3/4 view. The facial features are placed very low on the face. Usually the top of the eyes start at the lower third of the face, for example. Distance-wise, the eyes and nose are not that far apart because the eyes are rather big and the features are placed so low. The distance from the nose to the chin is bigger. At around the middle of it is the mouth. Since we already started talking about the features, we can move on to these next. Let's start with talking about the nose. The nose tends to appear very small since it's often only portrayed with a small dot or a line. In some cases, a bit of light or shading can be added around it as well. Most commonly, some light is added on top of the nose here. Next, we move on to the mouth. This is very small, making the characters appear cute as well. Usually it is portrayed with a line with varying thickness. Open mouths are very small as well. Usually the upper teeth and tongue are visible and the mouth has a downturned D shape here. Now it's time for the eyebrows. These are rather thin and tend to have an upwards curve. This leads to a more friendly expression of the characters. They also tend to be high up on the face. Often they can also be slightly asymmetrical. Now let's talk about a part that makes every artist very unique, the eyes. First, I'm focusing on the outlines and shapes of the eye. This is what you would focus on during the sketching and line art phase. As mentioned, they are placed fairly low on the head. How tall and wide open they are can depend on the character and their expression. Overall, the eyes are tall here though, leading to more surprised expressions. The eyes tend to have a rounded shape overall. For the upper lash, you have one big one and often multiple smaller lashes are added. Mostly 1 to 2 shapes would be added to the upper lash. Something that stood out to me here would be the small lash added at the outer side below the longest upper lash. The big triangular shapes of the lashes, which can be drawn in darker than the main lash line, are also characteristic. For Yoai's art here, the upper lash tends to have a very thin upper small line at the inner corner as well. For the lower lash, you usually have incomplete outlines with small lashes and at times only small lashes. What's interesting about the small lashes for some of the eyes to me would be that the biggest one is at the side closer to the viewer. This leads to the inner lash being the biggest for one and the outer lash being the biggest for the other eye. The lash lines can also be colored in some cases, especially for outer and inner parts. The inner side of the eyes tends to not have any lines. As for lines around the eye, you have one short line above the eyelash or 2 lines with the lower one being longer. The lines above the eyes are curved. Next, let's move on to what's inside the eye. The iris. This has a circular, rounded, tall shape. While the shading of it can vary from illustration to illustration, here is one shading method I figured out to draw the iris similar to Yoai. And for the approach here, I'm adding one layer for each color used to portray the iris. First is the base color, next would be a shadow layer, which I drew in at the top and at the outer side of the iris. The shadow shape in the eye can have a slightly darker outline here. I also added the pupil on this layer since it often has the same colors as the eyeshadow color. The pupil usually is a big circle with in the iris shape-wise, but it can also take on other shapes or disappear when the iris and pupil seem to be one shape together. Back to the layers. Next would be a light layer at the bottom of the iris. Afterwards we have a layer for some small details. In this case this would be lines. The white of the eye tends to have a shadow added at the top. The highlights I added here would be small circles above the pupil. At times, especially for colored illustrations, there will be shading added around the eyes. The darkest, most common shadow will be at the inner corner of the eyeline, below the eyebrow, directly above the eye, and below it a shadow can be added as well. Yoai usually also adds some blush on the characters' faces, which can be accompanied by blush lines. Now we're moving on to another aspect that can be very unique to each artist, the hair. The hairline art, just like the rest of the line art, has a lot of varying line thickness and portrays pretty many strands. Inner lines are very thin here. The lines add a lot of detail to the hair and make it appear flowy and soft. Now we move on to the hair shading. Overall, this is made up of multiple shades. First would be the base, next a shadow, then a darker shadow. After this would be the darkest shadow. In some cases, hatching is added as well, which also separates parts at times. Finally, I'd add a hue variation layer. In some cases, highlights can be added as well. These can have a darker shadow around them. Sometimes you also have just highlights and hatching shadows or just hatching shadows for the hair shading. This depends on how the illustration is colored, if shadows are included, or if it even has colors. Overall, the shading usually follows the shape of the head and the lighting direction. Most illustrations are very brightly lit, and due to this, most of the hair will be lit, leading to rather soft shadows that convey depth or overlapping parts. The shadow shapes are soft, rounded and zigzaggy. When it comes to hair over facial features, they are still visible underneath in most cases. The clothes Yoai draws have a lot of detail added to them usually. They often include oversized parts as well. The outfits tend to include a layering of outfit parts such as a sweater over a skin-tight shirt. A lot of frills, accessoires and other details are added as well here. The outfits tend to be casual and cute overall. They can be a bit more formal as well. The outfits commonly have oversized upper body clothes, often Japanese school uniform inspired collars, as well as short lower body clothes, usually skirts. The outfit designs tend to combine a modern, casual and kawaii aesthetic. The folds for the clothes tend to be portrayed with lines as well as the shading, if shading is included in the illustration. The fold lines or shadow shapes will often be soft and rounded here, but more about the shading later on after the next aspect, the colors. Very saturated and or pastel-y colors are used. Some illustrations have a monochromatic color scheme with overly black and white tones as well as one color. Other illustrations will feature more colors. The vibrant, saturated colors stand out here. The color schemes tend to be warm. The colors appear soft as well. Overall, the colors make the illustrations look more lively and convey a happy atmosphere. Shading is not always included in the illustrations, some just include flat colors. In these, only the eyes can be shaded as well. For illustrations that do include shading, you usually have clear shadow shapes. Some edges can appear soft through varying shadow color opacity as well. As mentioned, for the hair shading, the lighting scenarios tend to be so that most of the character is in light. Shading includes mostly cast shadows due to this. Here are shadow levels I would use to create a similar shading result to Yoaihimes' more detailed shaded illustrations. First would be a base color, next would be the first shadow level, then a layer for a second darker shadow level. Optional additional layers would be one for highlights and one for some hue variation. Depending on the lighting color and base colors used, the shadow colors will be affected. They tend to be more saturated often. Yoai adds many small patterns and details for the backgrounds, but also on the character or around the character. This will usually include small symbols like stars or other elements and symbols that fit to the theme of the illustration and the character. Small dots, hearts and sparkles are common, while backgrounds are usually not included. In a few cases, a simple colorful shape or a square with a grid would be used, for example. Now that we've gone through all the elements, let's move on to applying what we talked about in an illustration. As with my other art style analysis videos, I drew my OC Yumari, the moon guardian of his world here. We start with the sketch. For this, I first kept my canvas zoomed out for sketching in the pose, then I zoomed into the head and focused on drawing this. After the guidelines I sketched in the ears, nose and mouth, I made sure to keep the facial features rather low on the head to make the face appear more cute. For the eyes I made these a lot bigger and more rounded than for Yumari's initial design. This also adds to a younger look of the face. When sketching the hair I started with the silhouette and added in strands after this. Moving on to the body, here I similarly to the head first started with some guidelines. After these I drew in the body. I made the torso rather small so his body would appear more elegant and cute. For the hand, I first tried a pose with the palm facing the viewer. I sketched this in quite a detailed way, but then after experimenting a bit more I discovered I would prefer a pose with the hand facing the other way. Just sketching in very rough hand poses at first to determine which variation I would like most could have likely saved a bit of drawing time and energy here. For the new hand pose, I struggled a bit with refining the pose. I wanted the hand to appear elegant and kind of soft. After some time I settled on a hand sketch and moved on to the outfit. I used Yoaihime's initial outfit design but added some parts like the rounded small border around his chest to make it fit more with Yoai's cute designs. I also added some oversized sleeves and elements like bows. Drawing in all the accessoires and patches on the outfit was fun. I like to use a Moon and Stars theme here, fitting to Yumari's role as Moon Guardian. I also added some simple elements around Yumari here. After filling in the silhouette for the head and body, I moved onto the line art. I started with the head. One thing that stood out to me here was that I could either draw in a full thick line for the upper eyelid and color the line art afterwards, or I could outline the lash only and fill in the lash color during the coloring stage. What I went with here is the second option. Yumari also has bright lashes in his initial design, and for this using the outlined version fit especially. Every time I draw Yumari for these types of videos, I find it interesting to look at how different artists would portray bright lashes. Back to the process, adding in all the accessoires and small elements during the line art stage took some time. When I was finished with this, I filled in the flat colors. For this I imported the color palettes from my previous analysis files and adjusted the colors so they would fit Yumari's design. While his initial outfit design helped me with determining most of the colors, I experimented a bit with the colors for the smaller parts and accessoires especially as well. Then I moved on to shading, starting with the skin. I included a bit of shading to indicate the anatomy as well, but wanted this to be soft overall. For the eyes, I made sure to add more detailed shading, and after this I shaded the lashes. I only used one layer to make the lower part darker and add depth here. Next it was time for the hair. I started with a shadow around the upper and lower part of the hair, which helps to portray the rather spherical shape of the head. Yoai usually goes for rather soft, simple shading, and that's why I also went with a rather bright lighting setup with lighting from above here. This meant for shading all the parts I could. For one, focus on the cast shadows from the different elements when they would overlap with other parts. The small bows, for example, cast shadows on the outfit, or the head would cast a shadow on the body. Then there would also be the form shadows that tends to convey the volume. Often it's at the outside of each form. For the head, here I used a spherical shadow at the top and the bottom of the head to convey the head shape. I also added several shadow colors and shapes. For the outfit, I added soft shadow colors as determined by the color palette systems. I paid attention to also adding some shiny parts here. Finally, I shaded the background elements, then I softened the line art by duplicating copies of it and adding a copy of the merged clipped color above it. Like this, the illustration was done. Now let's reflect on this by looking at some differences between my artwork and Yoai's. First, I would mention the shading around the eyes and face. This looks too soft in my artwork. While the shading is generally soft in Yoai's art on the face, the blush and shadows around the eyes tend to add a bit more detail and bring attention to the face. Increasing the contrast and adding more visible shadows here would make sense. Then I would also mention the difference of digital versus traditional art. For Yoai's art, you tend to, for one, have some markers displayed along the artwork which show colors that were used. Then you also have a paper texture because the art is on paper. These are both things that are currently missing in my illustration. I wouldn't add pencils since I just use my digital pen to draw. Theoretically, I could add the different brushes I use, but I think instead focusing on just adding a paper texture to make the artwork look more traditional would be more interesting. And that's what I did next. I went over the illustration to add this. Then I also adjusted the shading and contrast a bit. The eyes were looking off to me, so I adjusted these as well. After this, I noticed that the face shape looked weird. There wasn't enough volume below the right eye to me, so I painted over this. Finally, I recently took some photos of old aquarelle art for a video, and I got the idea to use the paper texture from one of those images for the background. I added this and adjusted the colors of the texture as a last step. And that's the final version of the illustration. Finally, I'd like to share some learnings from doing this study. The first one would be about simplicity and detail. Both more simple designs as well as more complex ones are included for the characters Yoai draws. Often the more detailed designs will have simpler coloring, only featuring one color or an analogous color scheme, for example. The more simple designs, on the other hand, can have more detailed shading. I find this creates a nice balance. Either the shading or the more detailed designs can make the illustrations stand out while not overwhelming the eye. The next learning would be about making the characters' faces stand out more. What I find helps a lot in Yoai's illustrations here is how the eyes are portrayed. They tend to not feature a clear outline like all other parts of the illustration. They look more detailed, soft and 3D in a way, and this draws attention to them. Finally, I would mention the display of your artwork. Yoai tends to place markers with colors that were used in the artwork for the final post images. At times, sketchbook rings are visible as well. All of this is done in an aesthetic, mindful way which frames the artwork and adds dimension to it as well. Those would be some of my learnings. What was your biggest learning from this study, or do you have any other feedback and ideas? You can let me know in the comments. Links to Yoai's art will be in the video description, feel free to check it out. You can find some full screen recorded process videos, time lapses and full resolution files of my art on my Patreon. Thank you for watching, have a nice day and bye.